The air in our house had begun to change, a thickening of space between us that I couldn't ignore. What once felt like a sanctuary was now just walls and rooms I wandered through like a ghost. I'd always been the dependable one, the quiet, sturdy force of our marriage. Olivia, my wife, had always been the beautiful one, the dreamer, the one who carried herself with an easy elegance. In the beginning, our lives had been a blend of simplicity and joy. I worked hard, providing everything she wanted, the trips, the dinners, the nights where we would stay up late talking about our future. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We were partners, bound together in a love that felt, at least to me, indestructible. But slowly, like a storm creeping in from a distance, the distance between us grew. I noticed it first in the small things. The way she spent more time with her friends than with me, the way her phone seemed to always be within arm's reach, even at dinner. There was a nervousness in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. She started spending more time on herself, taking longer to get ready, dressing in clothes that seemed a little too expensive for the occasions. I chalked it up to her growing career, her newfound independence. We had both changed, after all. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. One night, I came home earlier than usual, the sound of the door creaking open echoing through the quiet house. I saw her phone on the counter, screen facing up. A flash of curiosity washed over me. I had no intention of snooping. Trust had always been the bedrock of our marriage, but something in me clicked, a flicker of doubt that wouldn't let go. I reached for it, my fingers hesitant at first, then firm as I lifted it, unlocked it, and opened the messages. The first one was from Marco. My breath hitched. The name was familiar, too familiar. He was a businessman, a man I'd heard her mention in passing, always with a smile that seemed too coy, too amused. They exchanged messages that were far more intimate than I ever imagined. There were flirtations wrapped in expensive compliments, the kind that were always followed by plans to meet at high-end clubs, weekends away in cities I couldn't afford. I read on, my chest tightening with each word. My mind raced, anger flaring, but the worst part came when I realized what she was telling him. I've never felt so alive when I'm with you. A chill ran through me. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a complete severance of everything I had thought was sacred between us. In that moment, I was no longer a man who was loved, I was a man who had been forgotten, discarded in the name of luxury, excitement, and whatever else Marco had offered her. I sat on the couch for what felt like hours, the weight of it all pressing down on my chest. My thoughts were a blur. Anger, humiliation, confusion. I wanted to confront her right then, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the fear of seeing her face, that look of guilt I knew would be there, the kind of look I couldn't bear to see. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I knew that nothing she could say would ever make this right. So I did nothing. I let the silence stretch between us, and she never knew that I knew. She continued on with her life, unaware that I had slipped into a quiet kind of rage stewing in my own thoughts. Every time I saw her, my heart broke just a little more. I couldn't stand the person she had become, but I couldn't look away either. The trust had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the cold, calculating reality of what had happened. She had chosen him, chosen everything he could give her, over the life we had built. Over me. And so, in my silence, I began to change. I knew I couldn't confront her in anger. There would be no outbursts, no dramatic arguments. I was going to destroy her, but I was going to do it slowly, quietly. I'd been with her long enough to know what she valued most: status, wealth, the thrill of a life that was beyond what I could offer. Marco could give her that, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing that she had won. I began to withdraw piece by piece. At first, it was subtle. I didn't ask her about her day, didn't inquire about the trips or the meetings. I stopped giving her attention when she would mention Marco's name, or when she laughed a little too brightly at a text. I could see the confusion in her eyes as she tried to figure me out. There was no anger, no bitterness in my voice, just distance. My indifference seemed to affect her more than anything. I focused on myself. I threw myself into work, started exercising again, and dressed sharper, looked better. I spent more time with people who didn't know the person I used to be. Slowly, the weight of her betrayal started to lift from me, replaced by something else, control. I wasn't the man she had once known. I was something sharper, more calculating, and it felt like power. Olivia noticed, of course. She became more nervous around me, more desperate for my attention. But I gave her nothing. She'd always been the center of our relationship, the one who dictated its rhythms. Now, I was the enigma. The more she tried to reel me back in, the further I drifted. She was in her affair, caught up in the illusion of a life she'd convinced herself was better than ours, but I wasn't interested in competing for her attention anymore. Instead, I let her think she was winning. I let her think that Marco was her escape, her ticket to a new world. But I knew the truth. She had chosen a world of opulence over the man who had once loved her completely. And what she didn't realize was that I had a way of quietly taking that world away from her. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense, not in the way people would expect. I wasn't going to expose her affair, ruin her reputation, or cause a scene. I was going to let her keep living the life she had chosen, but I was going to make sure that it would come to an end when she least expected it. I was going to let her think she had everything, while I carefully took everything she had built for herself and slowly, meticulously, ripped it apart. I didn't need to shout to make her feel small. I didn't need to scream to make her regret it. I would let the truth seep into her life, bit by bit, until she realized that the luxury she had chased wasn't what mattered. What mattered was loyalty, and I was going to make sure she never forgot the cost of her choices. The first step had been to let her watch me fade away, until she finally began to wonder if she had ever truly known me at all. I had no desire to feel sorry for myself. I wasn't going to let the ache of betrayal consume me, nor would I let my emotions dictate my actions. Instead, I focused. I had made a decision, and I wasn't about to let any sense of loss cloud my judgment. Olivia had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The guilt I might have felt a few months ago, before I knew the truth, was gone, replaced by a cold, methodical resolve. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was clear-headed, and that clarity drove me. It wasn't just about punishing her, it was about reclaiming my life. I knew that the best revenge wasn't one of shouting accusations, breaking things, or exposing her infidelities to the world. It was far subtler than that. It would be quiet. It would be slow. I would make her feel the weight of her decisions without ever uttering a word of condemnation. I'd watch her self-destruct, piece by piece, until she realized too late what she had sacrificed. I started by focusing on myself. I threw myself into the things I had neglected while I was consumed by Olivia's world. I hadn't realized how much I had shrunk under the weight of her expectations, how much I had lost myself in trying to keep her happy. It wasn't that I'd been a passive partner. I'd worked hard, built a life, kept her comfortable. But somewhere along the way, I had let her become the centerpiece of our world, and in doing so, I had become a shadow. Now I wanted to reclaim my presence. I started working out again, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. I got back into shape, stronger, sharper, with a renewed sense of self. It wasn't about vanity. It was about strength, about control. I needed to remember who I was without her. And with each day, I felt the power I had lost slowly returning to me. I wasn't just a man who was betrayed. I was a man who was becoming something more, something unrecognizable to her. As I rebuilt myself, I also built my life outside of her. I began to reconnect with old friends, people who didn't know the man I had become in Olivia's shadow. It was important. I needed people around me who saw me for who I was, not who I had been. I found myself enjoying their company, appreciating their attention, and most importantly, their respect. It wasn't something I'd had in a long time. I'd let Olivia's world become mine. Now, I was creating my own again. But Olivia, she was still in her world. Still in her affair with Marco, still living in the fantasy that her life had become. I watched her carefully, never letting on that I knew. She'd start to ask about things, about our future, about our plans, But there was a brittleness to it, a hesitation that spoke volumes. The more she reached out, the more I withdrew. She couldn't understand it. She couldn't understand why I wasn't affected by her absence. She had always been the one to hold the power in our relationship, the one whose needs came first. Now, she was the one left grasping at something she couldn't define. And the more I withdrew, the more she clung to what she thought she still had. The dinners she had with Marco were still a regular occurrence, and she would talk about him in passing, always with a hint of pride in her voice, as if she thought I didn't hear the way she described him: powerful, successful, a man who could give her everything I couldn't. What she didn't realize was that I was starting to build something of my own. Not just in terms of career or wealth, but in terms of influence. I knew people. I was meeting people, people who could change things for me. I started going to events, networking, casually mentioning my plans and investments, letting people see that I wasn't just her quiet husband anymore. I was becoming someone they wanted to know. In a way, it was a game. A slow, quiet game. I wasn't making any grand gestures or declarations. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was simply allowing myself to exist as something different, something that Olivia had forgotten about, a man who could stand on his own, without her, without the luxuries she had become so accustomed to. It wasn't long before I realized that Olivia was starting to notice. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of surprise when she saw me with people she didn't know, or when she realized I was making decisions without her input. It was almost as if she didn't recognize me anymore. She'd ask questions, simple ones like, "Who was that at the event last night?" Or, "What exactly are you working on now?" Her voice, once so familiar, had a tremor of uncertainty in it. And I didn't answer her. I didn't owe her that. I didn't need to explain anything to her anymore. The more she tried to pry, the more I withdrew, the more I let her feel the absence of the man she thought she knew. The more she clung to Marco and the lifestyle he could provide, the more she felt the cold, disorienting realization that I wasn't the man who needed her anymore. And I could see it. The cracks began to show. She would mention Marco, but there was a hesitation in her voice, a doubt that I knew she didn't feel when things were new and exciting. The glow of luxury, of a world where money was the answer to everything, started to lose its shine. The more she pushed for my attention, the more I pulled away. And the more I pulled away, the more she wondered what she had done. I wasn't going to rush this. I wasn't going to force the moment. But I could feel it building, the tension, the uncertainty, the regret creeping in. It was only a matter of time before she realized the mistake she had made, and I would be there, quietly, patiently waiting. But for now, I watched from a distance. I let her have her fun. Let her believe she could have it all. She was chasing something that would never satisfy her, and when the illusion fell apart, and I knew it would, I'd be there, a reminder of the life she had thrown away. The life that she could have had, but chose to replace with Marco's shiny promises of luxury. It was almost poetic, really. She thought she could have it both ways. But the truth was, you can't live in two worlds without losing one of them. And as she grew more entangled in her affair, I silently watched her unravel the very things she had once cared about. Her luxury was built on a lie. And I wasn't going to let her forget that. There was something exhilarating about the control I felt now. It wasn't about vengeance for vengeance's sake. It was about watching Olivia come to terms with the fact that she no longer had power over me. Every time she tried to pull me back into her orbit, I stepped further away. Every moment I ignored her, every word I withheld, chipped away at the foundation of her reality. The person she thought I was, the person who needed her, was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know how to stop it. Her confusion was palpable. At first, she tried to cover it up with small gestures, little gifts, a random compliment, the kind of things you do when you know you've done something wrong but don't know how to fix it. I didn't acknowledge them. The more she reached, the more I resisted. The more she sought validation from me, the more she turned to Marco, hoping that the luxury and excitement he provided would fill the void I left. But I wasn't there anymore. I was gone in a way she hadn't yet fully realized. And then it started to change. She began to question everything. The nights spent with Marco weren't as fun as they once were. The thrill of newness had faded, replaced by something colder. She couldn't deny the fact that the life she had built on his promises wasn't as stable as it appeared. The illusion was cracking. She would come home from one of her business meetings, as she called them, and there would be something different in her eyes. Guilt? Regret? Maybe both. She didn't say anything, but I could see it in the way she moved, the way she walked around the house as if she was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. But she couldn't hold on to me anymore. I had already slipped through her fingers. It wasn't just about Marco anymore. It wasn't even about her affair. It was about the realization that the world she had chosen, filled with wealth, luxury, and fleeting excitement, wasn't as fulfilling as she'd imagined. The more she saw my detachment, the more she started to doubt the choices she had made. And that's when I knew my plan was working. I was never going to confront her, never going to accuse her of anything directly. But I was watching her unravel, piece by piece. One evening, she sat me down. She was visibly nervous, as though she had rehearsed what she wanted to say but didn't know how to start. I could feel the tension in her voice, hear the way she tried to keep it steady, but it cracked. She asked me, in the most careful way, what was happening to us. She said that she missed the man I used to be. The man who would laugh at her jokes, the man who would surprise her with gifts, or take her out to dinner when it wasn't a special occasion. I didn't answer her right away. I let her sit there, waiting for me to say something. I could see the desperation building in her eyes, the uncertainty that was finally surfacing after months of me pulling away. I wasn't who she thought I was, and she couldn't grasp the idea that she had lost me in a way she couldn't fix. I had already made my decision. She wasn't going to get the man she once had. She was never going to get him back. Finally, I spoke. But I didn't say anything that would give her the satisfaction of knowing she had hurt me. I didn't tell her how deeply her betrayal had cut me. I didn't give her the words she wanted, the apology or the confrontation she thought she deserved. I simply told her that I was no longer the person she married. That I had changed. That I had grown in ways she hadn't noticed, and that it wasn't her fault, but it was also not something that could be fixed. She sat there, stunned, not knowing how to respond. She had expected me to be angry, expected me to explode, but I didn't. There was no fight in me anymore. I was done. And I knew she understood that. In the following days, I saw her attempt to fix things. She tried calling Marco less, but she wasn't fooling anyone, least of all herself. She knew it wasn't about Marco anymore. She knew it was about the life she thought she could have with him, the things she could buy, the things she could show off. But she had always taken me for granted. And now, I was gone in a way that she couldn't undo. It was in the small things that I saw her crumble. She would ask about my plans, where I was going, what I was doing, as if she still had a stake in my life. But I didn't let her in. I didn't let her back. The more she pressed, the more distant I became. And it hurt her. It hurt her because she wasn't used to being ignored. She wasn't used to being the one left out. She had always been the center of everything, the one who called the shots, the one who got the attention. And now, she was the one begging for something she couldn't have. She began to seek validation from everyone but me. Her conversations with Marco grew more frequent, but they weren't the same anymore. They were tense, forced. She didn't talk about their future together. She didn't talk about the things they'd do. She talked about business, about vague plans that seemed to lack substance. Marco was no longer a source of excitement, he was an obligation. The man she had once admired for his wealth and charm was now someone who felt more like a chain, a reminder of the world she had been living in, and the price she had paid for it. Then it happened. The tipping point. She called me one afternoon, but this time, there was no excitement in her voice. No laughter, no bright energy. Just a quiet, resigned tone that told me everything I needed to know. Marco's business was failing. His investments were crashing. The life he had promised her, the luxury, the endless stream of wealth, was beginning to collapse. And she, standing in the middle of it, realized that she was no longer in control of her future. She wanted to talk about it, wanted to know what to do next. But I didn't offer any answers. I simply told her that life had a funny way of teaching lessons, and that she would have to figure it out on her own. She tried to blame him. She tried to say that it wasn't her fault, that it wasn't what she had imagined. But in the silence between us, I could see the truth dawn on her. She had built her world on a foundation of lies, and now it was crumbling. She had traded love, loyalty, and a solid future for a fleeting fantasy of status. And I wasn't going to rescue her from the consequences. It was in that moment, in the quiet desperation in her voice, that I felt something stir inside me, a deep satisfaction, a release. She finally understood the cost of her choices. She was finally seeing that the luxury she had sought, the life she had dreamed of, wasn't worth the price she had paid for it. And as she sat there, uncertain of what came next, I walked away. She was on her own now. I didn't need to say anything more. The world she had built on betrayal and vanity was already collapsing. And I, in my quiet detachment, had become the catalyst for her downfall. She would never forget that. The silence between us had settled into something undeniable, a weight that neither of us could lift. Olivia, once so full of life and energy, now moved through the house like a shadow of the woman she used to be. There was a quiet desperation to her that I hadn't seen before, a sort of panic that rose with each passing day. She was trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through her fingers, and I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. The mask she had worn, the carefully curated persona of the perfect wife, was gone. What remained was someone who realized too late that luxury and status weren't worth the price of loyalty. She tried to reach out. She texted. She called. She left notes. But it was all meaningless to me. Each message was more of the same, empty apologies, promises to change, pleas for me to come back, to forgive her. She asked if we could talk about it, but I had no interest in discussing the ruins of a relationship that had already fallen apart. Talking wouldn't change anything. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words could. And the more she tried, the more I realized how completely she had underestimated me. She had thought I was weak, a man who would be broken by her betrayal. She thought that I would crumble in the face of her infidelity, that the luxury she sought in Marco's arms would somehow replace the love I had given her. But the truth was, I had been quietly building my own path. I had been rebuilding myself, shedding the skin of the man she thought I was, and in doing so, I became something stronger, something she would never be able to control again. She wasn't used to losing. For years she had held all the cards. The beauty, the charm, the grace. She had been the center of our world, the one whose desires dictated the rhythm of our lives. But now, it was as if the universe had shifted. The world she had built with Marco, the high-end clubs, the expensive gifts, the trips to places I could never have afforded, was falling apart, piece by piece. Marco's financial troubles were only the beginning. The cracks in his empire were becoming visible to her now, and with them, the reality that she had traded everything for a life that was fragile, unstable. I watched from the sidelines as she tried to salvage what was left of her perfect world. She tried to patch up the cracks in her relationship with Marco, tried to convince herself that this was still worth fighting for. But there was a hollowness to it now, a vacancy she couldn't fill. She had always wanted more, but now she was realizing that the more she reached for, the further it slipped away. She couldn't have both. She couldn't have the luxury and the loyalty. Not anymore. One evening, she sat me down again. This time, there was no bravado in her voice, no defensiveness. She was broken. The woman who had once dismissed my concerns with a laugh was now pleading, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. She spoke of the collapse of Marco's business, the lies that had been built around her, the false promises. She even admitted that the life she had been living wasn't the one she had dreamed of. But there was no apology in her voice. There was no acknowledgement of the depth of her betrayal, no recognition of how deeply she had hurt me. She wasn't sorry for what she had done to me, She was sorry that things hadn't worked out the way she had planned. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't sorry for betraying me. She was only sorry for losing. For losing the man she thought she could have had while still living in the fantasy Marco had promised her. She was sorry for her failed gamble, for the risk she had taken that hadn't paid off. But there was no remorse for the real crime. The betrayal of my trust. The destruction of our marriage. I sat there, listening, but I wasn't really hearing her. I was thinking about the months of pain, the quiet destruction of my soul as I watched her tear apart the life we had built together. I thought about the countless nights I had spent lying awake, wondering if it was all a lie, wondering if I had ever truly known her. The woman who sat in front of me now was a stranger, someone who had shattered everything we had for a taste of something she couldn't hold on to. She asked me if there was any hope for us, if we could try again. She wanted me to tell her that we could rebuild, that I could forgive her and forget the years of betrayal. But I didn't. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, the woman who had once been my everything, and I realized that I had no desire to go back to what we once had. What we had wasn't real anymore. It was built on lies, built on the assumption that loyalty didn't matter as long as you had money, status, and luxury. I stood up, my movements calm, deliberate. There was no anger in me. No need to raise my voice, to shout, to demand an explanation. She had already given me all the explanations I needed, just not in the way she thought. Her actions had spoken for her. The truth was right there, unspoken but clear. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her to beg for my forgiveness. I simply needed her to understand that it was over. That I was done. And there was no going back. I walked away from her, not looking back, and I could hear the soft tremor in her voice as she called out my name. But I didn't stop. I didn't give her the satisfaction of turning around, of giving her one last moment to hold on to the illusion that I still cared. I was done. And there was nothing more to say. In the weeks that followed, I let her twist in the wind. She tried to call. She tried to text. She tried to meet with me, to talk about the future, to apologize. But I ignored it all. I didn't respond to any of her attempts. The more she tried to reach me, the more I realized how small and insignificant she had become in my life. She wasn't the woman I had married anymore. She was a shell, a person who had destroyed everything she had once held dear, and she was now scrambling to put the pieces back together. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. And then, Marco's world collapsed for good. His financial troubles were no longer something she could ignore. His lies were exposed. The wealth she had chased for so long was now a crumbling facade. She watched as he lost everything, and in the process, she realized that she had lost me. She had lost everything that mattered. By the time she came to the realization that it was all gone, her life, her dreams, her luxury, her marriage, it was too late. I had already moved on. The man she had once known was gone, replaced by someone who had learned from the mistakes of the past. I had taken back control of my life, and I wasn't about to let her come back into it. I was no longer the man who needed her. I was no longer the man who would forgive her. I had become someone else, someone stronger, someone who no longer needed the illusions of luxury to feel whole. She had chosen her path, and now she had to live with the consequences. And as I walked away from everything we had known, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. It was over. And in the end, I had come out the victor,